Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast. And today with me, I have Kishan Vasani. Kishan has worked in the food tech industry since 2011. He's the co-founder and CEO of Spoonshot, an AI and food science-powered insights company helping the industry uncover the future of food by predicting consumer needs, trends, and innovation opportunities. Before starting his own venture, Kishan worked in two leadership roles for 3+ years at a global online food ordering giant, Just Eat. Also, since 2008, Kishan has been the co-founder and chairman of One Cause, an education-focused nonprofit that has raised over $1 million to date for grassroots institutions. Welcome to the show, Kishan.
Thanks, Karen. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. I'm really excited to chat today with you about your journey and food. So I feel like during this conversation, I may end up getting hungry.
Always hungry.
So first off, I'd like to talk about your journey. So growing up, were you always like entrepreneurial? I creeped on your LinkedIn profile and I know you went to school for business, but
hmm
yeah, if you could share what your upbringing was like, did it
Yeah.
revolve around food and business at all?
Actually, it was only recently that I kind of made that the kind of conscious connection to the childhood. And so my father had a grocery store, a local independent grocery store in the UK where I'm from. And we used to spend a lot of time there as a young child, just hanging out and watching him and, just whether it was the deli counter or whatever it was, that sitting there having the chips and, and just enjoying all the sweets and chocolates that were available to me. And that was definitely one part of it. I'm guessing there was a connection there to food, and he was always, enjoyed being an entrepreneur himself in the retail world. And then I think as I was growing up at school, it was a case of just I kept seeing opportunities with opportunities. For example, I used to sell books to students who had very expensive textbooks. I sourced them from other places, other markets where the prices were different, and sort of just offer them at a cheaper price. So I think I perhaps always had some sort of drive towards business and opportunities, whether it's food or otherwise.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, as mentioned in your bio, prior to starting up Spoonshot, you were at Just Eat. And did you feel your experience in those leadership roles at Just Eat like translated over to Spoonshot?
Definitely, definitely. There's a huge direct connection. I mean, it was so lucky to be part of Just Eat. I know it's not necessarily famous on maybe on your side of the Atlantic, but it is essentially the grub hub of Europe and other places like Australia as well. When I joined the company, it was just after Series B, and I was originally head of international marketing there, responsible for 8 of the 12 markets and growth and digital and brand, and it was just a phenomenal experience. When I joined, it was not nobody knew who Just Eat was really. By the time I left, 3.5 years later, we'd done the IPO in London, hugely successful IPO, and we're just growing the brand everywhere. And it was like on every road, you could see local takeouts and restaurants with the banner Just Eat everywhere. So it was a phenomenal story to be part of and lucky to be part of. And in the second half of my time there, I was a chief operating officer specifically for India. So I moved over to India at that point. This was back in 2014. And it was just that sort of deep dive into what I would call the world of digital food. And that was sort of the first generation, these marketplaces, these aggregators of restaurants as one example, Open Table being another. It was, that first iteration of companies, that generation of companies has been an eye opener for me. And, I always sat there thinking, oh, they'll definitely do this or do that. And, when I exited the business, sort of in early 2015, I sort of sat there and said, well, maybe I need to do something about it. Maybe, there are areas that I feel passionate about that I really wanted to jump into. And so, 6 months later, after leaving Just Eat, that's when I started what was originally called DishQ, which is a slightly different business to what it is now.
Yeah, I came across that at a talk. You were referring to your company as DishQ, and then recently you had rebranded as Spoonshot. So what made you guys decide to rebrand?
Yeah, I think it was the journey. It was, we started with this journey of, one of the things I personally believed having after the experience I had at Just Eat was it surprised me that, food is as you know, obviously everyone knows food is a choice that we make 3, 4 times a day, what to eat when we're hungry. And, we do it every single day of our lives. And that is a very personal choice for various reasons. And yet in the technology side, in the digital world of food, there was nobody who really had sort of taken that and thought about that and thought, how can I make the experience better for users and consumers of food? There was Netflix for movies and Spotify for music and Amazon for obviously general shopping and e-commerce, but no one had really done anything in the food universe. And that was the original idea. So we wanted to build a food recommendation engine that would understand your personal sort of tastes using food science and AI, and then make a prediction and that recommendation to you whenever you open an app. So our first business, DishQ, when we launched it when we started at the end of 2015, was a B2C mobile app on Android. It was originally because we were launching the business out of India. It was for the Indian market originally. And we spent the first year, 15 months on that business. And it was actually a really interesting experience. But of course, B2C apps, there's so many of them, and it was a very crowded market space. There were lots of small companies like ourselves doing this, or various forms of this. And, things like finding the right revenue model, user acquisition, user retention, all these things come up. And it just didn't feel like we had nailed it from a technology perspective, but we probably hadn't nailed it from a business model perspective at that point in time. And so we thought that was where we decided to pivot. So we've done kind of two pivots in our journey in this sort of 5 and a bit years that I've been doing this. That was the first pivot, was taking DishQ, a B2C app, and making it a B2B product. And so what we did is we turned the technology, the personalized food recommendations, into an API, which then we started to sell to other food technology companies or restaurant chains and those kind of food delivery platforms, so that they could plug in our technology into their app. So if you were using, let's say you're using Uber Eats or whatever, and you see a dish recommendation, that theoretically could have been powered by us. And that's kind of what we're doing. And we actually got more traction in that avenue. And we did that for about another year to year and a bit. But ultimately, again, we moved away because, frankly speaking, we felt like the solution we had built was more of a vitamin than a painkiller. It was a nice to have. And it was also very difficult to get these other companies to integrate our API. Like, they'd all love the idea in theory. And we had quite a few paying customers, but actually, they would sign a contract, let's say, in January, and they wouldn't necessarily integrate within 6 months. So scaling the business became really tricky. And so we just felt like they were obviously had other problems going on, whether they were operational and logistical fires they were dealing with, or user experience issues, or whatever it was, building restaurant partnerships themselves. So we just felt like, again, we got closer to where we wanted to be in terms of building a business that people needed. But it wasn't quite there. So again, this time we hard pivoted away, and this was in the sort of spring of 2018, and hard pivoted away from this entirely, essentially, and dropped that business. The only thing that perhaps was left were the two elements of that business that kind of remained. One was the principle of the idea, the principle that AI could be leveraged in this industry, but in a different use case, and the principle of using food science domain knowledge, again, in a different use case. So not necessarily thinking about individual consumer recommendations around food, but what if you could understand what consumers needed and wanted in aggregate, in larger groups? And of course, therefore, you're getting into the world of consumer insights and analytics and market research, right? And that's where we went to. And the original idea when we did that pivot was to build a menu innovation sort of analytics platform. So theoretically, the problem statement was, could we help McDonald's build the next burger in each of their markets? Because everywhere in the world, they have a localized menu now. I mean, obviously a few hero dishes like filet of fish and Big Macs. But outside of that, they have obviously these like special edition burgers everywhere, which are very different and based upon local tastes. So we said, could we do that using the same sort of principles of technology? And once we got into it, once we started researching the space a lot more, it became quickly evident to us that actually, yes, there is a problem in this space, that restaurant chains need help with innovation and testing and experimentation. But the pain point is much stronger for CPG companies who aren't necessarily as agile, as flexible, have long innovation cycles, high product launch failure rates, all other sorts of problems there. So yeah, we essentially started building an innovation platform, a data innovation platform for CPG companies as opposed to the food service and restaurant side.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Thank
That's how
you for
Spoonshot was
sharing
born.
your story. Yeah, that's really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your story because it's really interesting. A lot of the times, many companies, they start off with one thing and, they put it out there and then they realize either, it's not what the customers want or it's not getting as much traction and causing to pivot. So it's very interesting, yeah, to see how you went from like consumer based and now you're focusing more on like food innovation for like the larger companies and the industry as a whole. So yeah, speaking regarding your platform, your AI, and I love the name too, Food Brain. It just sounds so clever because it has to do with all this data regarding food. So it's mining an insane amount of data, like your data sources include like articles, blogs, social conversations, ingredients, recipes. Can you speak a little bit more as to like how that data is processed?
Sure, absolutely. So I think, one of the interesting things that we've learned in this last 2.5 years of the Spoonshot journey, where we feel that most companies have, obviously every company has some form of data, whether it's internal sales data, obviously their own product data, their ingredient data, whatever it may be. And, some of them have gone now to external data as well, public domain data. Mostly that's in this world of social media. That's where most people live. And as you know, social media monitoring and mining has been going on, for a decade plus now. But what we noticed is that's just part of the story, right? So when you look at the world of data and it's just, as we know, growing exponentially, there are three real domains: consumer data, or generated by consumers, generated by business, and generated by institutions like government or academic institutions. So when you look at that, most focus in terms of the public domain happens in the consumer realm. But actually, it's fascinating the stories that come out of the other two realms. Like think about it from a new innovation, new technology, patents, intellectual property, research papers in the institutional domain, and think about on the business side of things. Of course, outside of the obvious recipes, menus, and recipes, menus, and products, you've got on top of that, of course, blogs, like expert conversations, key opinion leaders, all these things happening, reviews by businesses as well. So there's lots of little places where you can go, and most companies only have some part of that, like of all of that data. They'll have certain focus areas, but they won't have the complete view. They don't have a full 360 view in terms of that open data. And that's one of our key things. So Spoonshot was built upon the idea, of course, that having data diversity can give you a lot more confidence around every innovation decision that you could make. So, but of course, because of that diversity, because of the high volume, because of the high velocity of data, and it's good to build it upon those kind of things because your AI models work better. The downside is the complexity. And that's where it becomes a real headache for us as a company to manage, because you are ingesting and processing, in our case, 28,000 plus data sources, and that number just grows and grows and grows. And there, you don't control what is going on at those source websites. You're just sort of, crawling them and understanding what's going on. And then you have to deal with each one and its own nuances, and you have to validate, and you have to verify, and you have to decide what role each of those plays. And then, of course, that's where we use, obviously, machine learning techniques, natural language processing, computer vision, to understand the different forms of data, text, image, etc., and then build derived insights on top of that. So the key is that we build derived insights on top of that data to give really meaningful intelligence to our users. And the key differentiator is, how do you take all these diverse data sets? How do you connect what a chef is saying on Twitter to what is happening in Reddit, to what is happening in a research paper, to what is happening in intellectual property, all these different things? How do you connect them together? Well, the way we choose to do that is by using the domain knowledge of food science, which is evergreen. So once you've built up an internal understanding of food science, and what I mean by that is everything from nutritional information, certain elements of sensory, of course, chemical compounds of ingredients. When you understand that, and when the machine understands that, it can start to find like unintuitive connections there, things that you wouldn't naturally think of. And that's how we generate output. And for our customers and for our users, we can do quite interesting things, all the way from identifying consumer needs very early. And that's what you want to do as a food and beverage company. You want to get ahead of the innovation curve and the trend curve. We can obviously map those into various trends and tell our users whether they're going to be mega trends, whether they're going to be niche trends, how fast they're growing. We can then translate that to innovation opportunities, which is like, is a keto cookie going to be a thing, and how should it be kind of played out? Who are the players in the market? What's happening? What kind of interesting innovation? What's the size of the prize? And perhaps for us, most interestingly, we can go all the way from that consumer need identification all the way down through to saying, okay, let's say the keto cookie is a valid area for a particular user or a particular company. How do they now actually generate a concept, a winning product formula for that particular need? So we will even tell them, this is the concept you need to build. This is the keto cookie. This should be the basic ingredients. This should be the macronutrients. This should be the food processing technologies. This should be the net carbs. This is the claim on the pack. This is the sensory nature of the product. All these different things can be told to us. So essentially, we're not just providing confidence around decision making, but we're actually shortening the innovation cycle by, depending on the company, weeks and sometimes months. And that's obviously to everybody's benefit.
All right. So just kind of adding on to your answer, you had mentioned about how your platform enables, to develop these insights of new combinations that people wouldn't think to put together. And one thing that really fascinated me, and I'm pretty sure you'll know which one I'm talking about,
Sure.
is the Nutella taste test, where you screen tested both soy sauce and Nutella, and then your findings were that soy sauce had 80% similarity in aroma compounds, like when compared to hazelnut and cocoa, which I find very, I don't know, like I can't wrap my head around it, because I like both, but obviously like on separate foods. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
It's a fascinating, for me, it was a fascinating story. I don't know about anyone else, but it was a funny story. It was the genesis of the entire idea for Spoonshot, where we kind of went from Dish Cube to Spoonshot, and I don't know, it plays into all sorts of other things. It's funny timing and all that kind of stuff. So basically, what happened was that Ferrero, which is the manufacturer of Nutella, it's a European-based giant, got in touch with us, and for some reason they asked us to. Well, they asked me to come in and deliver a presentation to their senior management, the chief operating officer of the group and his team. They were having a management offsite day in London, and they wanted me to come in, and the theme of their offsite day was AI, and they wanted me to come in and talk about applications of AI in the CPG industry. And I just said yes, and I didn't think about the consequence of that and initially. And then I realized, why are they asking us? Because at the time, we were still Dish Q. We were in the food service space. We were not in CPG. And I was like, I don't know anything about CPG at the time, honestly. And we sort of wrapped our heads together and said, okay, still, this is a great chance to build a relationship. And we're kind of exploring this new space. We're thinking about it. So let's just do something. And we did a hackathon internally in the company as a sort of way to build a presentation for them. And we talked about general applications of AI that we obviously knew about in the industry that were going to become a thing. And then we did this hackathon with what can we tell them about like Nutella, obviously being the world famous product that it is. And we just, the team just hacked together some interesting data from various sources, social media and others. And of course, our team of food scientists that we had just, were working on like analyzing the product and breaking it down. And they generated this list of breaking down, like you said, the major ingredients, the dominant flavor ingredients of Nutella, and they produced this list of the ranking of the ones that had the highest matches. And, bread was near the top. What a surprise. And then further down the list was, I think it was in the top 10 or something, was of course soy sauce. And we all looked at that and went, soy sauce in Nutella? We all had that same reaction, like, what is that about? And I think the first thing we did is we went to the local grocery store and made the purchase. And we're like, let's try this. And we did a bit of experimentation. But actually what we did find, what was interesting, is that, the system had generated this output, but actually it had also validated it, because we saw certain users on social media in Asia talking about recipes where they had, used noodles and Nutella and soy sauce together to make a recipe and a meal. And if you think about the application of that idea in reality, it's like basically taking Nutella, which is typically a snack or breakfast product with like bread or croissant or whatever people eat it with, and taking it to a completely new occasion, lunch or dinner. And when you are a very mature product like Nutella, that's a really interesting insight. And, that was fascinating for us. The only thing is we had no idea what the Ferrero's response would be to this. So off I went to the presentation, and I did the whole normal presentation that we were doing, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, I delivered this, and they just went silent. There was literally silence in the room. And I'm just like, in a boardroom, like I'm just in my jeans and t-shirt. They're all like formally dressed. And I'm like, uh-oh. And then they all burst out laughing. And I was like, okay, thank goodness. And they were like asking me, are you serious? Is this a prank? And I was like, no, this is not a prank. And they were like, this is so fascinating. And they all just started talking amongst themselves. And at the end of the presentation, they all came up to me and said, like, we're going to try this at home tonight. My kid's going to try this, all this kind of thing. And one of them said to me, actually, this kind of makes sense, because if you think about, hazelnut, and then if you replace that with peanut, and then you can see how it connects to sort of noodle recipes that you've seen. And so it's kind of unintuitive. And then when you hear about it in that context, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And what was fascinating to me was, how could it be that a giant like that didn't necessarily, I mean, I can't say it's true for the whole company, but certainly for that team, was not aware of this kind of thing. And I was like, there's something here. I said, there's something in this. And that's when we went back and we were like, okay, that's when we kind of said, okay, there's something in insights related to food and beverage that we need to tap into here, which, and that became essentially what Spoonshot was.
It's funny because I'm like thinking in my head how you mentioned about Nutella being more of a snack thing. And yeah, I feel like, I don't know about you, but Nutella is pretty much a staple in my house. So Nutella, soy sauce, and noodles. And just thinking, of course, a lot, I've been doing a lot more cooking during the pandemic. So trying to figure out, what recipes, what can I put together, or looking in the pantry and fridge, instead of having to go out to the grocery store and buy specific ingredients for that dish. I'm like, oh, okay, I have these three things. Hey, they actually can make a meal, and sure, it'll taste pretty good. So yeah, I'm very curious to try it out.
Yeah, do it.
Off the top of your head, are there any other, like, based on what Spoonshot has discovered, are there any significant unintuitive flavor combinations that you've come across that stick out in your mind?
Not as strong as that, if I'm honest with you. If you went into, the thing is, I think, and it's actually had a much bigger impact on perhaps us than I even realized myself now. It sounds weird saying this out loud, I guess, but like this whole thing with Nutella and soy sauce, actually, it made us think about being bold in terms of our insights and our recommendations, right? Being like, it's an industry that generally plays safe, right? And understandably, like, nobody wants to try random things in the supermarket or the grocery store. Like, you're going like, what the hell?
I don't know. I do. I like free samples.
Yeah, sure. But maybe you wouldn't pay for it, right? But like, and so they play safe. And one of the things we have in our platform is this feature called Ingredient Networks. And it is helping you identify emerging ingredient combinations and novel ingredient combinations. And we have something called Novelty Score is a particular proprietary score we have in our platform. And that basically gives you a sense of how new or how unfamiliar or how rare a particular ingredient combination is to consumers at a category level. And that's kind of like this, like most of if you were to use our platform, you'd see, and we have a free version, so feel free to test me on this one. Go in there and enter an ingredient, let's say avocado, and then you'll see like roughly, I think, 200-300 potential pairings. And it's ranked in order of novelty, so highest novelty first. And the first pairs you'll see are probably really either strange, weird, unintuitive, bold, whatever you want to call it. And so that's, I think, actually played out into our technology more than we perhaps even realize ourselves. And so there's a huge list of combinations out there that are used in a small number of products or a small number of recipes that could become the next big combination. And, we make that data available to the users.
And I think that could also be helpful too, with respect to generating less food waste. Because again, kind of circling back to my experience of people don't know, like they have all this food, but they just don't know an ingredients, and they just don't know like how to pair them together. So
Definitely.
I'd like to transition over to the pandemic, and I came across a report on LinkedIn how your company came out with a report in 2019 with 8 food and beverage trends, and then once the pandemic came, like 7 of them ended up being accurate, which is really really impressive. So do you mind sharing as to what kind of trends did you guys predict?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there was a whole bunch of trends across the landscape, and we did this in partnership with, so we did the underlying technology and data and insights, and it was put together with one of our advisors and partners, Liz Moscow, who's a food trendologist. You could think of her as the human version of Spoonshot, I guess, and she's been with us for the last few years, which has been great. And she's looked at our insights and our data and pieced this together as it was our first ever proper trends report. And this was, like I said, pre-pandemic. And it was everything from, like chickpea, the identification of chickpea as one key area. There was some really interesting things about fusion foods. That was actually, that was one of the ones I think that didn't play out. I think it was called sexy ugly mashups or something like that. We gave it these funky names. But I think what was interesting for us in that in the reports are available on our website and on our blog. I think the most interesting thing about that was that the way that we pieced this together. Again, it goes back to the data strategy that we used to really pull together this information, not just about diversity of data, which we talked about earlier, but actually about long tail. So when you think about how to build insights in any domain, food or otherwise, it's easy to go to the aggregators. It's easy to go to, OpenTable or Walmart or Amazon and piece together that and try and build insights out of that. But actually, what's most interesting and perhaps what has most signal and leading indicators are long tail websites. So it could be just one blogger, could be someone who's running a podcast, could be a local restaurant reviewer, could be just a local community leader, and they have a perspective and they'll be talking about that digitally on social media or otherwise on their own little website. And when you can piece together those that dialogue and those conversations and that information across obviously a certain geographic region, for example, that's how you really get to see that an idea is spreading. I mean, that is, let's talk about what is really a trend. It is, the definition is a spread of an idea, right? And so being able to see that, those little peaks of data that are, and little spots of data that start to emerge in different locations around different or similar topics, and you can really track and analyze that journey. And so that's how we kind of were able to do that with that kind of level of accuracy. And to say, 7 out of 8, I think, the point is that 7 out of 8 are still valid given everything that's happened in the last 18 months, right? Like that's the key. I think only one we felt is no longer relevant or in play. So I don't want to sit here and oversell that we 100% nailed it, but like, I think the point here is that 7 out of 8 are still very much in play today and even going forward. But yeah, definitely encourage you guys to your listeners to check it out. It's on our website.
And then with regarding additional emerging food trends, I know that you've mentioned in a previous talk you've done about the trend of upcycled food, which really piqued my interest because I've heard of upcycled like materials, upcycled clothing, but not so much upcycled food. So I'm assuming it's kind of like the same idea as with the clothing. You're taking food scraps that food, I guess, that would normally go, into like the green bin or for your compost. So you necessarily like get rid of them, but they're actually being used to create new products.
So what's happened is that it's really penetrated. This trend of upcycled food has really been around for a couple of years in the business domain. As if you're an industry insider, everybody knows about it and talking about it. And now it's starting to penetrate on the consumer side. And you've got various sort of variants of upcycling going on, of course, where you're taking sort of the byproducts off production lines and then using them for another purpose to create a product, a flour, a cookie. Renewal milk being an example of that. But you've got things like spent grain from like alcohol production being used for cereal and snack bars and flour. You've got leftover fruit pulp, which is obviously from juice production. Again, cereal bars is another one, or food flavors and colors. You've got dairy-free milk production, where you have the leftover pulp, soy or almond or oat, and that can be used for like baking ingredients. So there's so many different ways, and this is really the beginning of that journey. We see this as potentially a mega trend because it plays into various other mega trends. For example, food and sustainability and climate change. So I think this is really just the beginning. There's just been the formation recently of the Upcycle Food Association. They've just come out with a certification. If you're in this space in upcycling as a food and beverage brand, you can be officially certified and stamped now. So that's going to become much more of a marketing claim on the shelves as well. So it's a fascinating space, and it's all about the circular economy and sustainability and giving consumers a genuine sort of sustainable food options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, when you mentioned how it'd be like a market thing, like that totally popped into my head. Just like imagine that people are like, oh, okay, like checking for the upcycled label, like, ooh, this is upcycled.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what would you say regarding entrepreneurship? What are some common misconceptions people have when it comes to running a startup? And also, kind of like an add-on question, like, do you feel the whole idea of like being an entrepreneur, running a startup, it sounds like all sexy and cool, like everyone wants to do it?
Well, when Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher, built a film called The Social Network and won Oscars, and now that's how everybody thinks it should go, right? So, yeah, great film, but definitely not reality. Even though it wasn't necessarily telling the story, definitely telling the story from a different angle. But yeah, I think there are many misconceptions about startups. That you're 22 from Stanford, doing something out of your garage, and someone jumps in and writes you a check for $5 million or $100 million, and off you go and go, right? Like, I think the realities are so different. And for the majority, I mean, of course, some of these stories of incredible high growth startups, both on the business side and the consumer side, have been fascinating and are inspiring, of course. But I'd be surprised if anybody really believes that, certainly within the founder community, that anybody says any different from the fact that really timing is the biggest determinant of your success. I mean, everybody knows Zoom has been around for a while, but the reason Zoom, is where it is today is because of the pandemic, and no one had foreseen that. So, and that's just an extreme example, but it really does play in timing of your business. Even for us, going back to the story of DishQ, we were too early with our API food recommendation engine. If we had launched it now, it'd probably do far better because the industry is more mature and more ready for these kind of what were initially nice to have solutions and feel much more differentiated solutions now. So I think timing is absolutely key, and sometimes that's deliberate, and true visionary founders may have done spotted the opportunity at the right time and off they went. And for some of us, it can happen as a happy accident. So I think either way, I'm sure if your business is growing, then you'll take it however it comes. So I think that's definitely one misconception about how these big companies have come along. I think another thing that is maybe it's not fully a misconception, but certainly it's definitely a warning, I guess, to anyone, is that building a technology startup, is really, really hard. And it's, in terms of the core of doing that, is about building something that people love and something that people cannot live without. Essentially, that if you turned it off or shut it down, that people would scream and they would rebel and there'd be riots. I mean, that's what you really need to do, right? I mean, that's essentially it. And doing that is extremely difficult. I mean, we're still on that journey, if I'm honest with you. Here we are 5 years later, if I'm very honest, from a self-evaluation perspective, would I want to be where I am? We're still an emerging company. Of course, I'm really happy with our progress as a company. This was the last 12 months was our most successful ever. But, would I want to be further down that maturity curve? Absolutely. But everybody's got to go on their own journey, and you've got to figure these things out. And it's one thing to choose to build a company, software technology company, where you are the user of your own solution. Like that's one thing, and that's hard as well, but at least you can relate to the problem you're trying to solve. Try doing it when you're not the user. That is, 3x, 5x, 10x harder, in my opinion. I've done both. And it's much harder, but the reason we've been successful, I feel, whatever success we've achieved, the reason I feel like we've done it this time versus last time when, with DishQ, it was an industry I knew much better, but, the restaurant side, I had the industry experience, is frankly, it's just about ego and arrogance. It's like, you think you know it, you think you've done it, like, the industry, you worked in it, you were part of a success story, and, I don't need to validate, I don't need to double check, I don't need to research. So off you go and you just build, and you go straight to build without actually thinking everything through. You don't think about the business model very much and all that kind of stuff. Whereas when we did Spoonshot, we basically started with a blank piece of paper and said, we don't know anything about CPG. We don't have it, even though it's from the wider food industry, of course, but it's a completely different beast. And you have to triple check. You have to have it in black and white, understanding of a workflow, a user journey. What is the real pain point? Why is that pain point existing? Why has nobody solved it yet? All these things. So there is a ton of effort that goes into that, and it never ends. Because obviously your users change as they start to evolve in their careers and their journeys. So building something that people need, something that people love, especially when you're not building a solution or you're not the user of that solution. Wow, that's extremely difficult, but it's an incredible journey. I think the other thing I would say about misconceptions is that from the outside looking into the startup and venture capital world, most people will just be like, oh yeah, just go and pitch a VC, they'll give you the money, and that's how you build a $1 billion business. That's how you build a unicorn, and you're just, this idea of unicorn, $1 billion business. And you don't, once you only really understand this when you get on the inside, is that you are one of 100, as a founder and as a business, you are one of 100 or maybe more bets that a venture capitalist is making. And in the cold light of day, they only need one of those bets to really make it. The other 99, they don't really care, right? If you make a venture capitalist a 3x return, that's not good enough. You need to make them a 100x return. That's how their economics work. That's how they get money from institutions and investors, that their investors who are known as limited partners. So like that's the model. And founders, almost no founder knows that until they get deep into it and they're well on the journey. Of course, more information is out in the public domain now than it was years ago, but it's like, until you fully understand that, then you realize. And then you also need to break that cycle and really understand of, are you building a big business for your investor, or are you building it for yourself? And are you building it to be successful, or are you building it to be big? And those things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but you really need to understand what you're doing in terms of, and what the goal of the investor is at every stage. A seed investor just wants you to improve by, I say a bit, but they want you to grow a certain amount so that they can increase their valuation, and then they can sit back and let the next investor take over. And then that investor comes in at Series A, and then they let the next investor, and it's just, it is in the cold light of day, that is exactly what it is. And nobody should have any illusions about that, and just be very careful. I would say to any founder about what you're getting into when you raise venture capital. It comes with lots of expectations. I'm deliberately painting the glass as half empty here, because plenty of people are already doing the glass as half full. I don't need to speak about the benefits of all this. I just want people to know the realities.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you speaking to these realities, because again, I think people have this perceived notion of how things are, and of course you don't really know until you're actually in it, and may surprise you, especially with the fact with building something that you think people might want. It's like, again, unless you do the research, if you go out and if you don't go out and test, and not only that, but to test early and to test often, you may end up spending all this time building something that people don't want.
Yeah, and
which I think tends to happen.
There definitely, and there's a lot of because of all the kind of hype and this, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there, frankly. And for me, and this is no
Yeah,
disrespect,
I've heard that
disrespect to
term
anybody,
too.
no disrespect to anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur and desires to be, but for me, you can't really be an entrepreneur if you're doing it part time. You have to put it all on the line. And some people will disagree with that. Some people say they have financial commitments, and I totally understand that. This is one man's opinion. And my view is until you put it all on the line, your family's financial future, you don't really, that's skin in the game. That's when you make perhaps the purest decision. When you've got another income stream, and you can mess around, you can slow it down, you can speed it up, whatever you want. And I think a lot of people put their toe in the water in this world and have no real clue what it is to put it all on the line. And for me, that's the difference between an entrepreneur or a hobby business or a side hustle, which is all fine, but those distinctions should absolutely be made clear. And I think I've even told my friends who said, "Oh, I'm thinking about building a." Literally, this is one example. A friend told me that I want to build a travel startup. This was like 2-3 years ago, and I'm going to do it. And she works in a bank, and I was like, "What do you mean? How are you going to pay for it?" And she goes, "Oh, I'll just go pitch a few people." I was like, "They're going to laugh you out the room. Are you going to leave your job?" No, then they're not going to give you a penny, right? Because venture capitalists, because they have to make sure that you are fully committed, because they want one of these 100 bets to pay off, and that's why they want you to give up everything, and that's why they want you to be 100% focused on the business. And it's it's just going on a bit there, but yeah, I think it's a very unique view as a founder, and it definitely opens your eyes to all the other worlds of business that exist out there.
Yeah, and essentially, when you do put all of it on the line, you're lighting a fire under your ass. And I think having that fire, it pushes you to do more to help grow the business. And I think, yeah, you realize that you have to set your priorities straight. And really, do I need to do this, or I can live without this if it means that I can drive my business forward?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a case of when I started the business 5 years ago. I'm married, but I didn't have any kids, and I have 2 kids. That changes your perspective on everything, right?
Right.
And the sacrifices that come. But anyway, that's I guess another story.
And if you could have dinner with if you could have dinner with any entrepreneur, who would it be? And of course, since we're talking about food, what would you eat?
So my answer to this question, it might be different. I had a real good think about this one, I think, but because I'm not going to say it's. I actually don't know. It took me ages to think about this. And I was like, the answer I came up with in the end was fascinating for me. Even was that I said Elizabeth Holmes, from founder of Theranos, and I'm guessing you're familiar with her story.
No, actually, I'm not.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I suggest you definitely watch the Theranos story on YouTube and the documentary. So this was the founder, quit Stanford, youngest ever perhaps billionaire founder a few years ago, and she had claimed to build this machine that could do 200 blood tests in 2 minutes or whatever in one machine, whereas normally blood tests require you to do multiple different blood tests for obviously different tests, and take days or whatever it is. And she'd one blood test, one drop of blood, does 200 tests, few minutes. And, it went to the place where she had got top tier Silicon Valley investors. She had done deals with, I think it was Walgreens. She had a device installed there, and it was all a ruse. It was the Enron of the industry, I guess. Basically the machine didn't work, even though she had billions of dollars in funding or whatever it was. And it all came house of cards falling down a few years ago, and now she's facing prison and court cases and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, very fascinating story. But I guess the reason I wanted to have dinner with her is because I wanted to know. I mean, the vision is fantastic. To think about that as a potential solution, and the benefits it could have for the industry and for people is great. But where did it come off the rails? When did she decide that, okay, I'm going to try and fake it till I make it, and how did she go about that? And how did she let it go so far? And yeah, so that's I don't think I'll ever be able to do that. Maybe she'll let me visit her in prison if she gets her. um, but yeah, the meal probably something. Some definitely, of course, I'm a foodie, but I would. I'm not one for like discovery, as many foodies would, I guess, self-identify or define. I would say I'm quite particular, but I like all the wrong things. So,
Oh.
truffle mac and cheese, or a well done, beef burger with blue cheese. Again, the cheese theme resonates throughout. So yeah, any of the wrong stuff, basically.
Oh, yeah, that does sound delicious. So, if people wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about Spoonshot, where could they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I think that's the best place. Quite active there, both personally and with Spoonshot. So yeah, happy for people to reach out and connect.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this really fun conversation and really fascinating conversation about food. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks for having me, Karen.
Thanks everyone for tuning in and stay tuned for more episodes. Ciao for now. Bye.